Hey, Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. Welcome back. I'm standing at the intersection of Atlantic Avenue and Victory Drive, and the trees you see behind me going off into the distance are part of a memorial for those who gave the ultimate sacrifice in World War I. November 11th is Veterans Day. It's coming up, and it's a day set aside to remember not only those who served in our armed forces, but who gave the ultimate sacrifice and died in our country's wars. You remember from an earlier dispatch, we talked about the origins of Memorial Day, a day also set aside to remember those who died in our country's wars. It dates its origins back to the Civil War. Veterans Day, as we know it now, goes back to November 11th, 1918, 104 years ago, to mark the end of what was then called the Great World War I. It ended at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. November 11th, 1918, as I mentioned, when the guns went silent all over the Western Front. 37 million people, civilians and military, killed or wounded in that conflict, the deadliest conflict in history up to that point. The United States joined countries all over the world in wanting to commemorate that sacrifice, and it began to commemorate what was called Armistice Day in 1919, 1 year later. In 1921, the United States government buried an unknown soldier from that conflict at Arlington National Cemetery, and from that point on, Veterans Day or Armistice Day was commemorated every year on November 11th. In 1938, it officially became a United States holiday, and in 1954, Armistice Day officially became Veterans Day to commemorate and honor those who died and served in all of America's wars. In 1919, Savannah City engineer William O'Driscoll Rockwell proposed turning a series of unpaved streets on Savannah's southern border into a war memorial for those who had died in the Great War. 3 years later, in 1922, the city of Savannah took him up on that and turned those series of streets that connected Savannah's western city limits with the village of Thunderbolt and created Victory Drive, a living memorial to those who had died and served in the Great War. The city proposed planting 135 palm trees along the route, one for every citizen of Chatham County who had died in the war, as a memorial, and eventually, at its peak, there were over 2,600 palm trees that dotted the route. You can see the traffic on Victory Drive behind me. It still remains a living memorial to those soldiers who served and died in World War I. In 1929, the American Legion and the Savannah Women's Federation teamed up to put a marble monument here at the corner of Waters Avenue and Victory Drive at the entrance to Deaton Park with the names of all 135 soldiers from Chatham County who died in the Great War. In 1931, 2 years after placing the memorial to the dead of World War I at Deaton Park, the United Spanish War Veterans placed a memorial to those who served and died in an earlier war, often called America's Forgotten War, the Spanish-American War of 1898, placed it here. You can see it over my right shoulder at the southern end of Forsyth Park. An appropriate place because in 1898, shortly after the end of the war, President William McKinley came and visited Savannah, and while he was here in Forsyth Park, he reviewed United States Army troops. Here on the northern end of Forsyth Park is one of the smaller monuments, but also, I think, one of the most moving. It's the Marine Memorial, memorializes the 24 Marines from Chatham County who died in World War II. Later plaques were added to memorialize those Marines who were killed in Korea and Vietnam. It was dedicated on Veterans Day, November 11th, 1947, 75 years ago. The Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, General Vandegrift, was here. He commanded the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal during World War II and later received the Medal of Honor for his actions in the Solomon Islands. Savannah has other memorials to those who served and those who died, including the World War II monument down on River Street, Vietnam Veterans Memorial also on Bay Street, and of course the monument to the Confederate and U.S. soldiers in the middle of Forsyth Park. On behalf of all those at the Georgia Historical Society, to all those who served and to those who died on this Veterans Day, thank you.